hoping I'll run into the lovely sight of you coming my way. I stop right across from your door, but you don't see me anymore. So back to my room I go with a gloom and cry, tears of goodbye.
I'll wait for you. Don't worry, I'll wait for you. Jeff, are people in the Zoom room? Are they here? Is the Zoom open? Everybody's here? Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rabbi David Ingber, and I'm the founding rabbi of the Romemu community, and it's an honor and a privilege to have all of you here with us tonight, whether you're online or whether or not you're here with us on site. We're honored this evening to have a distinguished panel of guests. We're really privileged that JJ Velasquez is here and Condra Clark, that Elizabeth Glazer, who's not yet, will be with us on Zoom, that Zachary Katz-Nelson is with us, and I think I'm missing somebody. The judge whose name we're not allowed actually to mention. So we're happy that this is Ms. Glazer, you know. Tal? Can you help me? Where's Tal?
It's Andrea Phoenix.
Andrea Phoenix, thank you so much. It wasn't on my list and I noticed that I didn't know. And as well as the remarkable Ruth Messenger, who's with us as well tonight to moderate tonight's panel. Thank you to all of you. I was invited to say a brief word of Torah before we begin. What's on the table tonight is a conversation about human behavior. And that's always fallen along a spectrum. We human beings have the capacity to act in noble ways that benefit ourselves and others, and we also have the obvious ability to cause great harm to ourselves and to others. All religious systems and social systems have tried, in the interest of creating a world that is based on some moral good, as well as those who have aims that were far more concerned with the obvious utilitarianism of needing to find a way for all of us to live together. We've all come up with systems, all kinds of different ways to reinforce certain behaviors while curtailing or deterring others. The Jewish tradition has a long conversation about such moral aims and moral goods, as well as a long conversation about the right ways to go about reinforcing and rehabilitating behaviors that are less than social. As early as chapter 18 of the book of Genesis, where Abraham calls on God to be a just God. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, where Abraham says to God, will you judge those who are innocent with those who are guilty? We have a notion of justice in our tradition that demands not only that God act in ways that are just, but also that we human beings have some notion of what is just. And certainly from that chapter, we know that innocence and guilt should not be treated with the same level, the same univocal way. This demand of the divine to be just is taken to a whole other level in the story of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, who in the most important moment of Jewish sinfulness, in the most important moment of Jewish criminality, when the Jews or the Israelites in the desert worshiped the golden calf, called on God to be a God of forgiveness, not just justice, but to go beyond justice to a place of radical forgiveness. Even in the face of obvious Jewish guilt or Israelite guilt in the Bible, Moses demands of God not just what we might call pure justice, but a whole other level known as tshuva, repentance. The notion that it's possible for a human being to make a mistake, it's possible for a whole group of people to make mistakes, but it's also more than possible, it's probable that human beings will change, and that God too has to acknowledge that possibility in order for God to be God. We have from this, as many of you here know, and those who are online know this, in the Jewish tradition, from that conversation between God and Moses in the book of Exodus, we have the 13 attributes of rachamim, of mercy. Recited by Jews around the world for 2 millennia, we call upon God to acknowledge that we have made mistakes, but then to call upon God's acts of mercy, capacity, to imagine human beings as being human, evolutionary beings, those who actually can go beyond themselves to a new way of behaving. These 13 attributes of mercy, repeated over and over again, as if to remind not only the divine, but the divine within us. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. You, human society, you who are, of course, responsible for understanding the relationship between justice and righteousness, but more importantly, between what has occurred and what might yet occur. You, human being, we don't give up on you. You, human being, we believe in your capacity to become more. We, human being, the Torah seems to be saying in this repetition of this phrase, we are greater than the worst things that we have ever done. The Torah demands of us, and the rabbinic tradition demands of us, that we undergird our entire society based not on pure justice, but on something greater than that, on tshuva, on repentance or repair or return. The Torah recognizes that within each and every human being, there's infinite potential. And the Torah demands that we build a society around that human potential. Rehabilitation is itself the cornerstone of a world where mercy and compassion are the greatest virtues and values that we can uphold. The Bible in chapter 35 of the book of Numbers actually enumerates one specific system by which we might actually think of rehabilitation. The Torah tells us, the Bible tells us, that when the Israelites were to come into the land of Israel, they were to build cities. And these cities would be the cities of the Levites. The Levites were those who were the rabbis, the clergy, the minister, the priests, the imams. They were the holy people in the land of Israel. And those cities were the cities that the Bible tells us, those are the cities called Arei Miklat. Those are refugee cities. If someone committed a crime, they were to go to those cities, and those cities Miklat would gather them in. And the rabbis ask a famous question, why were those cities associated with the Levites? Just make 6 cities that would be refugee cities. Why were the Levites involved? And the rabbis answered their own question. They say, because the Levites were the ones who knew how to rehabilitate. They sang songs, they did therapy, they touched the human soul. And the assumption was that a person who would go to those cities, in the rabbinic view, is that they would be enabled, they would have the conditions for doing tshuva, of finding a way out. Finding a way to have compassion and from that place to start anew. And unfortunately, what has brought us here tonight is exactly the opposite of those Arei Miklat and those visions of human cities built upon rehabilitation and the possibility of human evolution. We have in our situation today something more akin to the very first crime the Torah says was committed. In chapter 4 of the book of Genesis, all of you know this. The first crime in recorded biblical history was between 2 brothers, one named Cain or Cain and one named Hevel or Abel. The Torah says that Cain rose up and he slew his brother Abel. And then after hearing his punishment, Cain cries out to God. Vayomer Cain, and Cain said to God, Gadol avoni minaso. My punishment is too great for me to hold. You've now garashta oti hayom. You've driven me away today from the face of the earth. And from your face, God, I also have been concealed. And now I'm a refugee with no place to go. Anyone who will see me can kill me, Cain says. And God says, it's true. Your punishment is too great, and so I will give you a mark on your forehead, not so that anyone who would see you would kill you, but that anyone who would see the mark would not kill you. And Cain's mark on his forehead becomes a cautionary tale about punishment that is too severe, about incarceration rates that lead to greater recidivism, where people can't recover, where people's burden is too heavy for them and they can't move forward with the life of tshuva. And we can hear the cry of Cain today from those who are innocent, as we'll hear, as well as those who have done their time and who want a new life. Cain's cry still can reverberate in each and every one of our hearts, punishments that are too severe and that are not effective, systems that are rigged. And so the Torah calls us back to human dignity. The Torah calls us back to cities of refuge, communities of refuge, where tshuva is at the center, where repentance and repair and the possibility of human evolution is centered, and that love reigns supreme. And that's what we're doing here tonight, with these remarkable people telling their story and telling us what we can do in order to build a more loving world, a more just world, a more compassionate world. It's an honor to use this space for that purpose. It's an honor to hear the cries of Cain that still reverberate through each and every one of our cities throughout this country. And we're so thankful to the Social Justice and Social Action Committee and to all the leaders on that committee who have brought this issue to the fore in the Romemu community. And chief among them is Tal Siegel, whom I'm inviting now to the podium to introduce our guests and to get the panel off the ground.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being patient. We're started. And thank you for being here on this cold night. We have a lot of guests on the Zoom as well. Maybe Rabbi Elster can tell us how many, but we have many of them. So amazing that all of you are here. I'll very quickly introduce our speakers because we want to jump straight in. And we have an amazing, amazing panel with us. We have our moderator extraordinaire, Ruth Messenger, who I believe does not need a lot of introduction. We have Judge Andrea Phoenix, who presides over the district courts in Nassau for courts for mental health and drug treatment. We have John Adrian Velasquez just next to me, who I think is one of the most exemplifying stories that shows the system from beginning to end. I'll let him tell the full story, but John served 23 years for a crime that he did not commit and was wrongfully convicted for. And today does a lot of amazing work for people who are still inside. We have Kendra Clark, who is also an amazing human being, runs one of the biggest transitionary communities, Exodus, and runs a lot of the ATIs for the Alternative to Incarceration program for youth and adults. And Zachary Katzenelson, who's the head, now this I need to read because this is a very long name for this commission. Zachary is the executive director of the Independent Commission on NYC's Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, also known as the Lippman Commission, right? Overseeing the closing of Rikers Island. Zachary also in the past represented the defendants on Guantanamo Bay. So he knows a lot of things about bad prisons. So without further ado, we also hopefully will have her join us. We have Liz Glazer, who is the former director of the Mayor's Office for Criminal Justice Reform under de Blasio, and before that, she was the Secretary of Security for Governor Cuomo. And unfortunately, she is stuck upstate, but she should be joining us on Zoom, hopefully. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it to you, Ruth.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Sorry I just sailed in at the last minute, but as I explained to Tal, I actually have family responsibilities, including care of a 2.5-year-old great-grandson, so I couldn't leave any earlier. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be with the Romemu community and the ongoing work that you do on social justice. I'm always honored to be in the presence of Rabbi Ingber, who I would say, in addition to his wise teaching, which you just heard, and which some of you are quite familiar with, is somebody that I know is always open to learning new things, learning new approaches, and thinking about new ways to engage both the Jewish and the broader communities. And so it's an honor to be in his presence. And I cannot possibly, I suppose some of you are not surprised at this, but I cannot possibly thank Tal Siegel enough. She hunted me down, gave me the specifics, told me the complications of every panelist, expected me to memorize and remember everything, and then last night my computer died. So I had to place emergency calls to her today to say, I did listen to you, Tal, but I didn't memorize it all, so do you think you could send it to me again? So that's where we are. I want to make 2 opening comments, my drash on David's drash. So David was extraordinary in his use of Torah. I would just remind you that the person or a person in our contemporary society who's most thoughtful about issues of criminal justice and punishment is Brian Stevenson, the head of the Equal Justice Initiative. And stealing from Rabbi Ingber and from Torah teaching, Brian says, very simply, no one is as bad as the worst thing they have ever done. And that is a succinct teaching that we all fail to recall. And the only context in which you're all here, so you're probably open to everything you're going to hear in the meta panel at first, which is about some of the broader issues, and then in the specific panel, which we'll talk about if I may be permitted to say so, the god-awful experiences at Rikers and the extent to which that ought to plague us all as residents of the city. But I just would ask you, if you haven't done this yourself, you don't need to do it right now, it's better to listen to the panelists, but try to think about these issues yourself in some quiet moment, imagining something, any crime you want, as mild or horrific as you might want to make it in your head, that could conceivably, terrifyingly, and I'm sorry to say this, done to you or to somebody close to you, and how you would feel about a demand for justice, and then say to yourself, what if that same crime was committed by somebody close to me? You can spend hours, days, weeks thinking this through and understanding that all of these issues are, I will say, over-influenced by the fact that we're only human. And we think about these issues differently when we think about which side of them we might be on, and we need to be aware of that as a fantastic human quality, but also a limit to our capacity to run around passing judgment on other people, because most people will think differently if they feel that they or someone close to them was the victim, or as opposed to if they or someone close to them was the perpetrator. So, with that said, I don't even know where all of these people are, Tal, but I'm going to follow my orders. So Liz Glazer is online. Liz, if you are online, the first question is yours. The broader part of this evening is about the broad question of incarceration versus alternatives to incarceration. I think you all know that. And the notion was to ask Liz, and this is a big time to do this in the city of New York, but to ask her to opine for a few minutes on what is reducing crime all about, how do we actually go about public safety, and how does the community, broadest community, city community, get beyond the immediate headline to think about what changes we might really want to be thinking about to have a more humane criminal justice and alternatives to incarceration system.
Great. Thanks so much, Ruth. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Oh, excellent. I don't know how to make myself visible, so I'll just appear. Wait, start my video. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. So nice to be here.
Good, there you are.
Yay. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person. You actually are just a few blocks from where my actual house is, but my apartment, but I got trapped someplace else. So it's such a great question, and it's such an important question. How do we make ourselves safe? And I think the answer may surprise people, because we've gotten so used to the notion of the way we're safe is we flood the zone. The way we're safe is we rely upon the police. Crime goes up, we call the police. And cops are a very important part, and the criminal justice system is a very important part of how we make ourselves safe. But it actually, and surprisingly, is not the main thing. And it's not the only thing. And we have very good evidence of that. We have it from our own experience of, in the first instance, the way we're safe, the way we all decide to behave and care for one another is through our connections to each other, through our families, our neighborhoods, and everything else. All those informal controls are actually what makes us safe. And that sounds unbelievably gushy and kind of pie in the sky, but it's actually the approach, and I'll take you through this, that led to the safest period that our city has ever seen, with the lowest incarceration rate. So from 2017 to 2019, we had the fewest murders that our city had seen in decades, as well as the lowest incarceration rate, lower than it had been since the 1940s. And the way in which that happened, and I'm just going to give sort of the penny tour, because I know we have the judge who's going to go into more detail on this. But the way that happened was that within the justice system, there was a very, very focused approach of trying to use arrests in jail as little as possible, and to really understand when force had to be used, when incapacitation, jail had to be used, and when there was something else that actually worked better. I think the judge is going to talk about alternatives to incarceration. Does everybody need to be in jail? Or is there a better way for people to be able to build their lives and have a stable connection that means that crime goes down? And what happened in 2017 to 19 was that it wasn't just the criminal justice system that there were huge investments in, but the notion of how we very intentionally build strong neighborhoods and support neighborhoods to be strong by opening community centers late, by having universal summer youth employment, by doing a whole range of things that the evidence shows reduces crime and reduces mortality. And so that there was a very concerted effort across the criminal justice system and outside the criminal justice system to build those kinds of supports. And one of the important facts then and now is that there are really a very few neighborhoods in which disadvantage of all kinds is concentrated. If you were to look at the top 10 neighborhoods for shootings today and 40 years ago, they're virtually the same neighborhoods. And when you see those neighborhoods, they also are the neighborhoods in which every other kind of social distress is found, from high asthma rates to high unemployment to low educational achievement. And there are reasons for that. We sort of say disinvestment, but there are very sort of specific and structural reasons why some neighborhoods do not have the resources that actually make people be able to have the kind of life in which instead of ending up in jail, they have jobs. And so we had this extraordinary period from 2017 to 2019. The pandemic hit, and like many cities across the country, in fact, every city, as the city began to reopen in the summer of 2020, things really began to unravel. And so shootings doubled between 2019 and 2020. Murders rose by 50%. And that was an incredible shock to the system. But always to remember, while we need to get crime down, when crime went up that much, we essentially got ourselves back to where we were in when Mayor Bloomberg was mayor, a period of time that I think many people view as being a safe time in the city. So crime needs to come down, but it also, we're not back to the 90s by any means. In the 1990s, murders were north of 2,000, and they are a fraction of that now. So what are the things that we learned in the 1990s and that we learned in this very safe period and that we have to kind of get back to and double down on? Well, one of the most important things I think we learned is that there are a lot of ways to change behavior. And here we go. So this chart essentially is a chart of murders and of murder rates in the top 10 biggest cities in the nation. And you'll see sort of 2019 is the pre-pandemic number, where New York City is really one of the safest big city in the nation. San Jose is a little bit safer, but with every other big city, we continue to be the safest. And then in 2021, although that murder rate goes up significantly in New York City, we continue to be the safest by far of the big cities. And so one of the things that we've kind of learned from this very long history from the 1990s to now, and a period in which incarceration was used really as one of the single tools to keep us safe, is that changing behavior can happen in a lot of ways. We have sort of chosen to default to police and prosecutors as the way to make us safe, but it's come at a really horrific cost. And I'll give you one fact that can stand in for many, many, many other facts, which is this: in New York City, in our poorest zip codes, a third of Black men will be jailed by the time that they're 38. Think about what that means for the hollowing out of neighborhoods, of families, of sort of economics, of everything. And that is sort of one of the wages of incarceration. So it comes with huge human costs. It also comes, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, with huge fiscal costs. Today it costs $500,000 a year to incarcerate somebody in Rikers Island for a year. That's an enormous amount of money for a system that does not make people better by any means. And we'll talk about sort of how damaging jail is and why, among many other reasons, we have to think about very carefully about how much of it we use and when we use it. So I guess I would just end by saying we have about the best evidence that science can give us about what actually makes us safe. We have random controlled trials done in New York City about what happens when you light a street. Felony crime goes down by 36%. we have similar kinds of evidence around jobs, around housing, and around everything, around all other kinds of things that make our social connections and our social fabric stronger. What we don't have right now is the will or the plan or the organization to be able to knit those things together in the way in which we were able to, not perfectly by any means, but in a very intentional way from 2017 to 2019, to be able to make neighborhoods stronger and to use the criminal justice system as parsimoniously as possible in order to make all of us safer and to put people on a path to a good life.
Thank you, Liz. So that was extraordinary. And again, without deviating from everything we're going to hear from the panel, I would just urge you in thinking about the difference between the quick fix response and what really works, to pay attention to today's headlines about what is the best way to deal with people who have evident mental illness on the streets, because we're doing the same thing all over again. Let me take a minute to say that there will be time for questions and answers, and Lauren will give out cards later on so that you can post your questions and we will get to them. So store them up or write them on a little scrap of paper and we will get to you eventually. The judge is online. So we hear in New York all the time about alternatives to incarceration, and occasionally we hear about alternative courts in the city system over the last 30 years, but it's a place in which we are way behind many other jurisdictions, and Nassau County, it might occur to you, is not very far away, but has a very sophisticated system of alternative to incarceration through alternative courts. And there's a whole set of questions, but I think we should just start by getting an explanation as to what the courts are, what their history is, and what they do. And then I think the most evident question that people will have is, how do you decide who gets moved through that part of the system? And is it your belief, is it the system's evidence that everyone can change or not?
Wow. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you might want to get a little
Move it up.
closer.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Is this good, Rabbi? Do I get a blessing for that? Good evening to you all. I'm Andrea Phoenix, and I sit in the Nassau County District Court, and I've been sitting since 2007 and re-elected 2 additional times. So I'm a 3-term judge, and I've been sitting for about 15 years, but I will warn you, I started at the age of 4. So having said that, I've sat in many parts of the district court over the years, and I adjudicate both felonies and misdemeanors. But perhaps this is the most rewarding experience that I've had working and presiding over these 2 courts. And Ruth, the thing that I'm going to do, if it's okay with you and if you will indulge me, is so that I am not long, and we all know what long means when you're sitting there and you have the mic and you are captives. I'm going to let you escape by reading my comments to help you navigate a little bit through the courts that we have, if that's all right with you. And then I will tell you that because I am a sitting judge, I take no position on the exploration here tonight concerning alternative incarceration. So I'm not able to do that. My view is very narrow, and I hope that you will indulge me, and I hope that I will introduce to some and present to others things that you may or may not know about problem-solving courts.
It's not very narrow, it's just very real. Go ahead.
Okay. So tonight's program addresses the timely issue of alternatives to incarceration, and I'm delighted to be invited here tonight. I want to start by telling you that we're not far into the new year, so I'm wishing you all a sweet new year as we go forward. And I would like to talk a little bit about problem-solving courts in general. These courts exist nationwide and certainly all across New York State. And these courts address problems such as mental illness, human trafficking, veterans issues, drug addiction, and other salient and pressing concerns in the criminal justice system. Now, I preside over 2 problem-solving courts in Nassau County. These are the Mental Health Court and the Drug Treatment Court. And I adjudicate both felonies and misdemeanors in the mental health court, and many violent felonies most of the court is a felony court, and a lot of violent felonies are also adjudicated in that court. And in the treatment court, I adjudicate only misdemeanors because we have a companion court that is called a diversion court, where felonies are adjudicated with respect to the treatment court. So I was assigned very early on in my career to the mental health court first, and more recently, within the past 6 to 8 years, to the drug treatment court. And these courts offer defendants who I term as participants. They offer the participants treatment for their major psychiatric illnesses or drug addiction in lieu of traditional prosecution. By taking a plea up front in a problem-solving court, participants have an opportunity to avoid or mitigate criminal convictions and the collateral consequences associated with convictions. Research and studies have shown that the nexus between criminal conduct and the provision of treatment usually ensures a much more successful outcome than punitive incarceration. This is because a successful participant who graduates from a problem-solving court is less likely to repeat the crime accused of because they were exposed to treatment, inclusive of rehabilitative programs, housing, medication, and therapeutic intervention. They can also seek help with educational and vocational opportunities, and additionally with social and family wellness programs. Most, if not all, of their needs can be met by helping mental health court defendants to balance their mental health challenges and treatment court defendants to become drug-free and healthy. So what happens in problem-solving courts at the beginning? Once the defendant is accepted into the problem-solving court by satisfying the eligibility requirements, such as the care of mental health, in the case of a mental health participant, having a psychiatric evaluation and other criteria, and in the case of treatment, in the case of the treatment court, satisfying the treatment placement and other criteria. Once they come to the problem-solving court, they come for the first time with their attorney, and they avoid the traditional court process and enter into a plea that remains in place throughout their time spent in the problem-solving court. They also enter into a contract and agree to an alternative jail sentence that is imposed if they are not successful in treatment court or mental health court. Most likely, they are successful, and the plea is vacated, and a felony can be reduced to a misdemeanor. Misdemeanor can be reduced to a violation, and if the crime that was committed at the inception is a violation, the violation can even be eliminated with a complete dismissal. Many times and oftentimes, felonies and misdemeanors are often reduced at the beginning of the plea or process, or promised to be reduced at the end of the plea process to violations, and they are dismissed depending on the circumstances. During the participants' time in our problem-solving courts, they may not always have such a smooth ride. They may have to overcome many obstacles and hurdles and temptations. This is why mercy is often shown and why they are given many chances, and their programs and treatment plans are adjusted to address all of their critical and individual needs. At the same time, they are treated fairly yet firmly when necessary. In mental health court, there's a treatment plan in place and an assigned case manager who will assist the participant on an individual basis, links them with treatment, housing, and other needs, and at the same time monitors their activity and progress. Similarly, in the treatment court, case managers are assigned, and the levels of care include crisis intervention, detox, rehabilitation, and intensive outpatient and regular outpatient treatment, and sometimes long-term inpatient care. In both courts, a team meets regularly to discuss each participant and their progress. The team includes, but is not limited to, the judge, the assistant district attorney, the defense attorney, the case manager, and other clinicians such as psychologists and psychiatrists as needed. The team has an invested interest in the participants getting well and being successful in the program. We talk about these participants all the time. Sometimes it may even be a Sunday we get a call. We are very, very invested in making sure that they have every opportunity to succeed. Now let's turn to graduation day. Graduation day, there are bells and whistles, medals, tokens of success. In my treatment court, we give medals. In my treatment court, we give leather-bound journals for them. And there are tears of joys, ecstatic family members, and moving and deeply felt testimonials. I always tell them that their success is huge. It's not a little thing for them to turn their lives around. It's not small for them to do this. This is big. And they can't believe that they've met the mark of excellence, but they have. And sometimes it's long. It's more than, sometimes it's a year, and we have some people that it's they have very uneventful journeys, but many people have long journeys. Sometimes incarceration in between to show them what would happen if they don't succeed. There are so many reasons why the journey is long, but it is a journey that is meaningful, and it is a journey that they can really say, I did it. I'm a success story, because they are. And it is an honor to serve in my problem-solving courts. And with my team, we change and save lives. It is really a way to show that we are giving a second chance and allowing the individuals in our treatment courts across the country and of course across the state to assume their rightful place in society. So that's just a little capsule of what we do in the treatment courts.
So I'm not going to ask this question really to everybody, but certainly the people who have spent time in and dealing with the more traditional prisons, and certainly the judge, and Liz, if you want, but what are the conditions in prison that make it less likely that behavioral change will occur? And what are the conditions in alternative to incarceration or problem-solving courts that make it more likely? And I'd like to just hear a couple of people speculate on that briefly. You'll have lots more chance to talk about your own experiences later.
Well, first of all, thank you. In terms of social conditioning, because that's what we're talking about, and the behavior inside of prisons, the mindset, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're discussing mindsets. Culture is driven by mindsets. And so a lot of the individuals that are incarcerated, we have to realize, we talk about this term rehabilitation, and the rabbi was speaking about it earlier, but the prefix of on that word is re, and the prefix re means to do something again. And what we're not taking into account as a society is that a lot of the individuals who are incarcerated, and the judge knows best, are very young. And some of them didn't have the proper guidance to be habilitated in the first place, which is the actual word. So how do you rehabilitate somebody in a system that doesn't work when they've never been habilitated? Somebody has to show them what that consists of. What is it to be a member of society, right? Because a lot of the individuals that are incarcerated, and I'm talking from personal experience, people that I was around, I spent 23 years, 7 months, and 8 days incarcerated for a crime I did not commit. But I was around a lot of individuals who did commit crimes. And what I realized is that a lot of good people were incarcerated because they made bad choices. And a lot of those individuals were misguided. A lot of those individuals didn't have two parents at home to take care of them. You know, some of them didn't even have working parents. Some of their parents were gang members or drug dealers or drug users. And so they missed out on a lot of the core principles that our society expects from individuals. And so that started in their communities when they were growing up, right? That's a bigger problem that we have to look at. When we look at problems and we want to dissect problems, we have to look at the root of it. And we're failing to do that in the criminal justice system because the root of crime is poverty. It's the lack of opportunity that the judge just spoke about that's being offered in her courts, right? And those opportunities are not being offered in prison either. In fact, individuals are doubling down on the negative behavior that brought them to prison because that's the culture that exists inside. And it's not all about the individuals that are incarcerated creating this culture. It's created by policy as well, right? So I'll give you an example an analogy to try to bring you to where I was, right? How many people in this room would feed a hungry neighbor? Exactly. Do you know by policy in the state of New York, to feed another incarcerated individual can actually wind up getting somebody disciplined to the point that they will not be able to reach out to their own family, that they will not be able to come outside of their cell except for 1 hour a day, that they will not be able to receive food packages or go shop at a commissary to buy these products that they use to fulfill themselves, right? And this would be the punishment for being human. So let's think about that. What does that mean? If the policies are not put in place and allowing individuals to treat each other as humans, and if these individuals, not by all staff, but by some staff, are not being treated human, and I'll be the first to tell you that it's not human to live in a 6x9 cage. I spent 23 years in a box that's smaller than a lot of your bathrooms. Your tub was my bed, and I still had a sink and a toilet in the same cell. So just imagine how claustrophobic you can be in an environment like that, and then think about living your life there, right? So there's a lot of different dynamics that come into play, but trust is not big in prison, right? Love is not big in prison. Empathy is not big in prison. And these are the things that we live off of. We live off of one another. The love that we have for each other and the love that we show to each other. The respect that we love and show to each other, right? These are all missing dynamics in individuals' lives inside. And then they release them with no money, In New York City, in New York State, let me say rather, not the city, because the city is different. I'm gonna explain that to you in a minute. But in New York State, when you're released, you get $40 on a bus ticket. Can you imagine doing 25 years, losing your family, losing your friends over that time, and then coming home with $40 in a bus ticket and told that you have to get your life back on track? Is it no wonder that the recidivism rate stayed over 50% for the last 10 years? How does a person get by after the first day that $40 is gone in New York? The cost of living, right? Your first meal might take more than half of that. How do you clothe yourself or get yourself to a job interview the next day if you don't have programs like Exodus? If you don't have programs like Fortune Society, right? These are the alternative to incarceration programs, but they're also the programs that welcome individuals who are returning citizens.
Okay, I'm going to let, and I know you have lots more to say, but we're going to do a lot more with you. Kendra?
Yeah. So, just as you were talking, you told a lot of my story. I always start off by talking about how I grew up in a village of 750 people in the middle of Illinois. The police were 90 miles away. I grew up in domestic violence. My mom had serious mental illness. She died from cirrhosis because she was an alcoholic at the age of 46. So I've been on my own since I was 16. And obviously what comes along with that is incarceration. That's kind of all I knew. I was in and out of jails all across Illinois, from rural areas that had 6 women in total to Cook County, that is vastly bigger than Rikers, but I've been on Rikers as well, and I'll talk about that in the next panel. And I always talk about what the rabbi mentioned earlier about people who have experienced harm and then people who harm, right? I think of my women specifically. I don't think I've ever met a woman in any one of those facilities that has not been abused in some way, form, or fashion prior to them becoming incarcerated. So that's very, very common for women. We talk about the trauma we experienced before, during, and after incarceration, and there is not a single facility that I've been in across this country where we were not abused while we were inside, right? So it's that same concept when you talk about addressing the root causes of incarceration. That's what alternatives to incarceration do. And I was really lucky when I came home from prison this last bid in 2011. I got an internship at the Fortune Society. I worked my way up through there 7 years in different departments. And that's what really taught me about what alternatives to incarceration were. And it's a little different than the problem-solving courts, because with our alternative to incarceration programs, they just come from the regular Supreme and criminal court. Like we don't have a specialized, some of them do come from specialized courts, but we could do this in every single court, right? We don't even need to have specialized courts if all courts would actually live by that, right? And really address the root causes and focus on treatment versus jail. And how do we really reduce recidivism? So, when I always think of my story, I had no support, no community most of my life. I think there was at least 10 times where I was released from incarceration with the clothes on my back and the shoes on my feet, no money, and trying to figure out where I was gonna stay that night and where I was gonna eat. And I spent a lot of years in and out of homelessness. I was even released one time 90 miles in sandals in the snow with nothing. They refused to even give me a phone call, and I had to hitchhike 90 miles to get back to Chicago. So that is very, very common for what us women have to go through. And with the alternatives to incarceration, I believe that everyone deserves a chance to add an alternative to incarceration. I think when you really, and I look at this now too, I work with people who've committed sex offenses, for example. I grew up being sexually abused by my stepdad, and I've been raped multiple times. So now I have to also service people that have those crimes, right? And I think that's what radical love is, when you really can get that understanding that hurt people, and healed people, heal people. And that's for all of us. I think everyone can change. So, with our alternatives to incarceration, we do a lot of court reports. The advocate is in court with the client. They get mental health treatment. We have traditional and non-traditional forms of therapy. So it's not just talk therapy, it's yoga, it's meditation, non-contact boxing, art, music, right? Things that we all think about and cherish out here that for decades, most of us who were in and out of systems our whole life, whether that's the foster care system, the prison system, the shelter system, we didn't have access to any of those. So, and it's all those communities that Liz talked about that you see in New York City. And one thing I do want to say too is we see the differences and disparities between who is provided with alternatives and how many alternative and problem-solving courts there are, right? Nassau County is a great example. It's pioneers of its time, but also look at the demographics of Nassau County compared to New York City. And we know that these ATI programs can cost as low as $7,000 up to $13,000 a year per participant, and we are still spending over $500,000 a year to incarcerate people on Rikers. So I also want us to look at it from that fiscal perspective. And if you add supportive housing, because that's what really are folks that are seriously mentally ill who are out here and being violent on our streets, they need supportive housing wrapped around it. We could still do that for $30,000 a year instead of the $500,000 a year, right? We could save $1.2 billion every year by doing supportive housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll get back to you on the second panel. Judge, I was told you might need to leave early, so I just would love, we heard your description of the courts. I think everyone is moved. If you had to say, like in a couple of sentences, I know you said a little bit of this, but what is the key element of what you do that most contributes to behavior change? What things would you single out?
Ruth, I don't have a succinct answer for that, but what I will tell you is when the participants come before me, I know about them. They're not a number. They're not somebody that just passes through. I ask them questions that they know, that I know who they are, and that I care. I know that isn't, where does care come in with legal? I'm not sure, but I do, and it does come in, but all I know is that in some way I have to blend it. You were talking about homelessness. Sometimes when I spoke to you a few minutes ago, I talked about the first day of coming into a problem-solving court. That's the typical first day. We have homeless people. I have to spend a month and a half just gathering, having the attorney gather and the case manager gathering information so they can have the proper ID to continue in the court system. All of these things exist. Talking to people longer than you would in a normal court process because you have to meet people where they are. If you can't meet a person where they are, you're not necessarily going to get the same type of the results that you desire, which is for them to be successful. I don't know, Ruth, if I'm answering your question.
That'll do fine.
Okay.
That's great. All right, there might be other comments. Tal, where's Tal? So you have to decide whether you want to do your question or you want me to move toward the second panel. Well, we can pursue Tal later because Tal has actually had some personal experience with this in Israel, doing alternative punishments and how they work. And I think part of what we really most want to thank the judge for is this is a working system. You know, she described to you how it works, but the point is it works. And it's got all the components which Rikers does not have, and which we are spending a lot of money not doing. And it's a kind of a tragedy that we're where we're at, but it's really important to hear how it works and how you talk about it because it's so very different. And I want to say it's so very different from what many of our courts do. But I also want to say to everyone here, it should influence how each of us talks about these issues going forward from tonight, because you actually just heard a working example, you know, in a lot of discussions about tough issues, including criminal justice, where people are like competing with like who can be tougher. There's nothing else that works, but the fact is there are other things that work, and they're very present, and we're not paying attention to them. So I really want to thank you, just in case you have to leave early.
Well, I want to thank you for having me come. I'm just delighted.
Thank you. So we will come back to you later, Tal, but I want to switch to the second panel, if that's okay with you. Well, you want to come and see, you can be succinct. Can you be succinct?
You were gonna answer truthfully, right?
Well, come to a mic and just tell people a little bit about your experience. We'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll talk about Rikers, because I think it's important.
That's when you know everybody knows me too well here. So the ATI that I served on was a boot camp type, military boot camp type of ATI in the IDF in Israel, where basically kids with severe behavioral problems and criminal justice record, criminal record or involvement, and could not function in a normal environment for very, very long. What we had in the program is a strong combination of some of the things that were told here, were said here about incentives to change and tools to change. So besides the military discipline, which obviously we all went through, there was also a lot of therapy, personal group therapy. We helped them complete their GEDs or high school diploma, get a vocational diploma that was good for civilian life after. And when they finished their army, if they hit certain points in their service in good standing, any criminal record was expunged. So it was a complete turnaround program. And like I said, with tools to change, but also strong incentives to change. And one of the most the thing that was ingrained to me the most in our training there was really constantly said to us is that the line between punishment and abuse is a very fine line. The reason we had to understand that is because as commanders, as officers in the Army, you can very easily get high on your own power, right? And you have to be constantly aware of where you're treading, because here's the thing, and we saw this both personally with, I personally saw this with just over 4,000 soldiers that I presided over, and also in statistics long-term, is that when you do too much punishment, when you over-punish people, behavior doesn't change, actually, it becomes worse. Because two things. One, if we punish, right, our punishment is stronger and worse than the infraction itself, then now we're the offender, right? And that person is the victim. And why the heck should they listen to us in changing behavior? It also, as JJ mentioned, strengthens the notion that the only way to solve problems is by violence and more force, right? And the worst thing is that when there's only punishment, or whatever you do, you get punished, right? You don't even know what to do anymore. And why bother? Because you're going to get punished anyway, right? And two things happen to people. They either become, punishment tolerant, so they can take more and more and more and heavier punishment, still don't change, or punishment avoidant. So they will do things right to your face, but then behind your back, they'll just continue. So what we see is actually the opposite effects. When we punish more, when it's not balanced, we get really opposite effects. And it was interesting because my last year in service, they had a huge investigation in the Army because of overuse of punishment. And they had a big reform where they took a lot of our punitive tools away and upped the incentives and the rewards. We all did not believe that it would work. We all thought it would, like, how are they going to do that? Not only did it work, the rate of success went up by 20%, both of finishing the program and the entire military service, and remained since then. And I served in 94 to 96. Since then, the rates of success has consistently been 20% more. So we were proved wrong. Good. Right? And I think the last interesting thing is that, when we think of Israel and the IDF, it's a pretty busy army. Whatever we think about Israel, the one thing we can say for sure is that Israel does not play around with its security, right, with its safety. And So if Israel does such a program in the army for 40 years already and doesn't want to let it go, we do it because it works, not because of politics. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna come back to questions about behavior when we start talking directly about the people who've had experience in prison in Rikers. And I want to set the stage. The second half of the evening is really specifically about the ongoing crisis on Rikers Island, which we have the misfortune of reading about on a regular basis, and the plan that we are more or less, depending on who you like to believe, in the middle of, which is a plan to close Rikers Island. But before I go to the panel on that, I just want to say one thing, because you just heard from several different people about this issue of behavior change. And we all have our opinions about behavior change. So I just want to keep a couple of things in mind that are in your own life. And I'm doing this because I could see the age of the audience. There was a point at which everybody you knew smoked. There was a point at which nobody you knew would put a seatbelt on in a car. There would be a point at which those of us who are skiers and bicyclists never saw a helmet. All of those things have changed radically in my lifetime by a variety of cultural changes, messages, occasional punishments and fines, but there's been a concerted effort which has produced massive behavior change among literally hundreds of thousands or millions of people, so including some of us in this room. So let's be careful about how we talk about, oh, people's behavior doesn't change. Okay, so I think Liz is still on. We have the Zachary here with the experts. So let's just give us, for people who aren't up on this, the original notion of the plan to close Rikers, where it came from and why, where it is right now, and how you connect that effort to the current, what I will say is the current ongoing crisis at Rikers Island, where people are dying who were not sent to Rikers Island to die. Go right ahead, and then Liz is on the screen. She can interrupt you as she will. I can't see the screen, so.
All right, I'll kick it off, Liz, and then please absolutely chime in. And so Liz, by the way, for the time she was with Mayor de Blasio, was really the driver of the mission to close Rikers. That it was given to her as a mission, but she not just given to her, wholeheartedly endorsed and accepted by Liz. And without her, we would not be at all where we are today, which is that we are on the path to closing Rikers. But let me step back for a minute. And the Rikers Island is a jail complex, right? It's for people that are almost entirely pre-trial. They're waiting for their day in court. They have not yet been convicted of anything. And they are on this island in the East River. It's near LaGuardia Airport. There are 7 active jails on the island right now. And there are about almost 6,000 people who are incarcerated, almost entirely on Rikers. There's also one other city jail that's not on Rikers, which is a jail barge. It's moored to the South Bronx. That's been there since the early 1990s. That has about 600, 700 people on any given day who are locked up there as well. And Rikers is a brutally violent, decrepit, dysfunctional place. And it's been like that for a long time, because for so many years, it was isolated, out of sight, out of mind, and neglected almost entirely. The people there, the facilities there, the buildings there, all of it. It is the buildings, if you walk through Rikers Island, it is literally crumbling before your eyes. Right? I've spent quite a lot of time in the jails in my job, and you can see the number, I'll just say the number one source of weapons in Rikers are the buildings themselves. Rusted metal, broken plexiglass. You literally can just rip almost anything off the wall.
Window frames. I've been there. Window frames.
Window frames, all of it. And it feels like a land that nobody cares about. And so officers who walk in there feel neglected. Incarcerated people feel neglected. And it is a brutally violent place, honestly. And it is a place that feels like you get nothing when you walk in, and you get nothing throughout your time, and you are stuck. So almost everybody, as I said, is there pre-trial. But there's a small segment serving a short period of time for a sentence, about 400 or so folks. But the rest of the almost 6,000 are there basically waiting for a trial. But trials in New York City take an inordinate period of time. And so you have people who are waiting. There are over 1,400 people who've been in Rikers for more than a year waiting for a trial. There are over 500 people who've been there for more than 2 years waiting for a trial. And I was there not long ago. One key fact about people at Rikers that over half the people at Rikers have received mental health treatment while they've been there. Right? 1,100 folks have a serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And there are these wards where they're kept. They're called mental observation units primarily, where the most serious people with most serious mental illness are kept. And they're just big open rooms, probably about the size of this space, actually, with about 40 people in them, just beds, row after row after row of single beds. And a number of us were there, actually. Some of the folks in this room were with me on this visit earlier this year. We went through, we went into one of these units, and these men had absolutely nothing to do all day long. Nothing at all. They weren't getting treatment. They weren't getting counseling. They weren't getting even outside. Nothing was happening for them. They were sitting there. Some of the men were sitting just in stupors on their cots. And we spoke to one man who had been there for 4 years waiting for a trial in those conditions. The other thing you notice when you walk around too is that almost everybody is Black or Latino who's there, right? 60%, 61% now Black population compared to 24% of the New York City population as a whole. Only 8% white at Rikers. And you have this situation where if you think about what's the goal, these are people who we're not even talking about the notion of rehabilitation, because that's presuming, the presumption is that you have committed a crime and you need to then find your way back to society in a better way, right? These are folks who have not yet even been convicted. And to be treated this way, and for everyone in this environment to be in there, staff included, is unrelenting, and it is no wonder that people come out worse off than when they went in, because almost nobody returns to our communities better off when they went in, and 75% of the people that are released from Rikers come straight back home. They come back to be our neighbors, our family members, they're in our communities, and is that good for any of us? And I think the point that's been brought up time and again here is about meeting people where they are, and I just want to mention that goes for everybody in all facets of the system, including victims of violent crime. Because if you ask victims of violent crime what they want, they usually want to know two things. One, why? Why did this happen to me? Why was this done to me? And two, how can we be sure this will absolutely never ever happen again to anyone else? And whether you believe, even if you presume every single person at Rikers is guilty of the crime with which they are accused, which of course is not true, but even if you presume they were, the idea that people will go through that and come out better off, less likely to commit another crime, is utter insanity. And so there was a movement that built, I'll just briefly say, there was a movement that built of people actually that were formerly incarcerated in Rikers, starting about 8 years ago, that came together with their family members and started speaking about their stories, to tell the tales of what was happening inside, to expose this isolated island in the East River and say, we're not going to be out of sight, out of mind anymore. And started speaking up, and people had to listen because they were speaking from the heart. And here was a face to this problem that you could read about in a newspaper, maybe a New York Times story here and there, and it would disappear. They're actually real live people. And people know the story of Khalif Browder, who was a 16-year-old boy, black boy from the Bronx, who was arrested, accused of robbery, of stealing a backpack, and locked up in Rikers. And he was there for 3 years waiting for a trial, 2 of those years in solitary confinement. And he told his story when he came out, and it really captivated, I think, many, many, many people. And then several months, over a year after he came out, he took his own life because he'd been so harmed and traumatized by what he experienced inside. And I think this galvanized a lot of people to look at Rikers in a new way and say, this is not working, this is not helping. It is all falling apart before our eyes, and the human beings who are inside are treated just as horribly as the buildings have been neglected, and that doesn't work for any of us. And so this plan was created to close Rikers once and for all, and we're on that path right now.
Okay, so there's 1,000 questions here. There's also Tal, who I told her that it was impossible to do these 2 panels in this amount of time, and she's now bugging me about what time it is. So, all right, well, let's hold the questions for a while. JJ and Kendra, I want you each to talk a little bit more in the context of Rikers specifically, but really what it is like being in prison. I'm going to add one story to the one, now I'm taking my own time, but when I was at Rikers visiting about 6 months ago, I asked the commissioner if it was true that people were taking pieces of the window frame and using them to stab each other, which is what people who had gotten out of Rikers had told me. And I'm perfectly happy to expose him publicly. The commissioner's response was, yes, we're experimenting with a new window treatment.
Thank you, Ruth. I think that's a good segue to talk about where does punishment begin and where does punishment end. And so punishment begins at the minute you walk through the door in Rikers Island. Rikers Island is actually a gladiator school. It has nothing to do with rehabilitation or anything along those lines. It's like the brother just mentioned, it's just a place where you sit and you stay and you're stuck with your thoughts and the thoughts of those around you. And most of those thoughts are deeply immersed in trauma, right? And as Kendra said earlier, it's hurt people and heal people, but there's no healing going on there. So where does the punishment end? It doesn't. To this day, I still feel the trauma that I experienced in 1998 on Rikers Island. To this day, I have to deal with all of everything that I've experienced and find a way to just push it down and keep moving and realize that I'm no longer there, you know? And so the punishment will never end for anyone who's ever been a victim of the madness that takes place at Rikers Island. Whether it's male, whether it's female, we're never gonna escape that, right? And the fact that individuals may be potentially innocent is totally mortifying to me, particularly because it's my personal story. And I know firsthand exactly what it feels like. And there's no way that I can sit here. You can have me here for a day speaking, and I'll speak the entire time, which I won't tonight because I know we're on time. But the reality is that I can never explain to you what it's like. And in fact, I wish that prosecutors and judges can just go through the experience in the controlled environment, but just go through the experience so that they can understand how serious it is for them to be in the position that they're in. Because their job is to protect society. And what they're doing right now, they have no idea because they don't have the experience. So I don't blame them for that. But they're not protecting society. They're hurting society because they're sending them to a place where they are going to become worse, not better, which means that society has to deal with that when they get out.
Thank you,
And
that's
that's the
beautiful,
problem.
beautiful. Kendra, comment or two?
Yeah, I'll never forget my first day on Rikers Island. I had a pretty big case. And so I wasn't getting ready to see court right away. I spent 3 days in the bullpen. The bullpen is the first initial big room that you've actually seen in the newspapers where they have all the people laying down in their own feces. That's the bullpen. And you just sit there for as long as it takes for them to finally actually take you to court. And my case was very special, so that's why I had to do it the 3 days. But when I first got in there, there was a woman who was screaming for food because she was so hungry. And, the officers had already handed out the bologna sandwiches, because while you're in that bullpen too, you only get fed bologna or peanut butter sandwiches. That's it for those 3 days. They don't give you anything else. If you're lucky, you get a hard egg in the morning. And this was in 2010. It's not that much different today. And so she was so hungry, she put her hand across the bar, outside the bar, and she pulled the garbage can towards her, and she grabbed bologna sandwiches out the garbage can and ate it. And every single officer sat there and watched her and refused to feed her. And they all laughed about it. So that is how demoralizing and dehumanizing it is. I mean, back in 2010 and 2011, the sewer system would come up in the day room while we were sitting in the day room on the regular. So we would always get locked back into our cells. So it was sinking back then. So the sewer system has gotten much worse over the last 12 years, right? They talk about how many buildings they can't use right now because they're so dilapidated. And, you know, I think just the sexual abuse and the degrading that you have to experience, and I think this is for everyone, but, you know, they used to line us up when you first went in, and there's this machine that they used to have us sit on. It was like a big metal chair, and they're doing a lot of research on still trying to kind of sue the department for this. But we all had to be naked and one by one go sit on that same chair without them disinfecting anything. I mean, it is egregiously dehumanizing, right? So I just want people to paint those pictures. And I think as a woman, we had to deal with a lot too when it's our time of the month, for example, and you're not provided with pads or toilet paper, and you're just left to sit in your own blood all day because they won't allow you to shower. So like, these are the type of things that we're not lying about this. You see this in the media all the time. And I think what's so frustrating for me is I do so much work. I've joined the campaign to close Rikers back in 2015, and I have heard women tell stories that are my story of all this abuse that they experienced in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s. I got women coming off right now that are telling these same stories, right? We just saw this during COVID. So that to me is really my driving force of why I'm trying to change this system and really think about it. And I'll just end on, you know, I had the honor, and I agree with Zachary, working with Liz during that time in Mock J was really a time where the activists and the elected officials and the judicial system came together, and we all worked so well. And that's why I think it was those two safest years of really safe period that she talks about there. It was such an honor to work with her and with Zach. And I got to go to Norway back in 2019 with the mayor's office and the Department of Corrections to tour facilities out there. And, you know, the first thing that the officer said, first and foremost, when I got there, I got to meet the researcher who did the Stanford experiment. I was fangirling. If you've never seen the Stanford experiment, watch it on Netflix, because it shows the true story about when you give one group of people full power, what happens, right? And this was in the 70s, an experiment that they did on incarceration. They took college students, split them up, and said half of you are guards and half of you are incarcerated people. And within 24 hours, the guards were dehumanizing and abusing people, right? So this is something that we all know. We've known this for so long. And in Norway, their model is the sentence is the punishment. So there is no punishment after that, right? It's all about teaching people how to be good neighbors. And, you know, those principles and models, I'm constantly talking to folks and bringing back, because they had a recidivism rate and horrendous rates of suicide like we did back in the day. And they changed it using these models based on humanity and normality and these really, you know, really radical love, in my opinion. And now their recidivism rate is extremely low. Like, we have the tools and the skills that we need to do this. It's now making the politicians put the money where their mouth is and actually get it done, right? We have to fight for this. So thank you.
Lauren, I'm going to suggest that you ask all of the questions. Now, the panel is very smart, or I'll ask the questions, and then I'll read them all. And then, okay, and then we'll let people figure out who and what they want to answer. And Liz, if you're still there and you want to chime in, just let me know. I can't see the screen, so I wouldn't know unless you were talking. Before I do the questions, I just want to remind everybody that we've had all kinds of references to ending punishment, what constitutes abuse. And I just want to remind you that the theme set for this and set by Rabbi David was what constitutes tshuva, what constitutes some level of forgiveness and repentance and return. So just keep that in mind. It's a way of thinking about it. Okay.
Bruce?
Yeah, go.
I'm just wondering if I could say one quick thing,
Yes.
First, I just wanted to say what an incredible honor it is to be with JJ and Contra and Zach. But I just wanted, just hearing their incredibly eloquent and accurate descriptions of Rikers and punishment, I think everybody's probably thinking, like, how could it be this bad? And frankly, it's never been worse. If you look at any number, the number of deaths, the number of stabbings and slashings, anything that we keep track of, it is worse than it has ever been, even in the 90s. Even in 2015, when the city settled a suit about the culture of violence, that there are unconstitutional conditions of violence, it is so much more violent now that we would be lucky to get back to the unconstitutional conditions. And this has existed through 5 consent decrees, 8 mayors, 24 commissioners, and it doesn't stop. And it's not because of money. You've heard $500,000 a year per person who's incarcerated. It's not because of the lack of staff. We have the most richly staffed jails on the face of the planet. It is exactly because of culture and the unwillingness to deploy the power that's necessary to change the culture. And so I just wanted to make
That's fantastic, and obviously speaks to sort of what the message that we need to take out of here. I'm gonna read the questions. The first 2 questions are a little bit more technical, and they were actually probably best answered by the judge, but we knew that that might happen. So if any of the panelists want to address them, that's fine, but not necessary. And then the third one I'd like you all to comment on. So the first one is just to explain the differences between, or the similarities between, problem-solving courts, prison rehabilitation programs, and different programs. There might be some comment on that, but they're all different kinds of programs. But alternatives to incarceration gives you the particular message that it's something other than just being in prison. The second one, which is more too technical for me, is the difference between the alternatives to incarceration for people who have mental health problems, as opposed to the system that's developed around pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. And that's more of a legal issue, and I'm not sure I could articulate the difference, although, as I said, the current issue that we're all going to watch in the headlines is what makes somebody crazy and what the remedy should be. And the whole discussion tonight about, I have a lot to say, you can see that, but the whole discussion tonight about correction officers is directly related to the notion that by waving a magic wand, the police department is now going to be able to do psychiatric diagnoses in the park. That's a side comment. The bigger question, which I think I'm going to ask everyone to address, although Liz actually just began it to address it herself, is, but given the financial numbers, why is alternatives to incarceration not a slam dunk? And why is it so resisted when it's so much cheaper than keeping somebody in prison? And so anybody, Liz, if you want to jump in first, be our guest.
Gary.
I can now sort of see you.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a great question. It's the $64,000 question, or the $1 billion question, or the $100 billion question, which is the budget of the city of New York. I think it's really that we've gotten used to thinking that our safety lies in the criminal justice system, when in fact, that's surely a piece of it, but it's not everything. And it's not the first thing. It's really how we deploy and integrate civic services of all kinds, all the things that people have talked about tonight. And then as a very last resort, use that kind of awesome power, but be so careful with it, because as Conjure and JJ described, and Zach, it is out of control. And it is so out of control that the last corrections commissioner begged the judges and prosecutors not to send people to Rikers because he did not believe he could keep them safe. So I think we have our own culture shift to do, exactly what Ruth was talking about, which is, how else can behavior be changed? Well, it can be changed in a gazillion other ways that really have nothing to do with the coercive power of the state. But we have not steeled ourselves to use those kinds of civic powers in the same focused way that we are willing to use the criminal justice system. And so I think it's a question of, both leadership and figuring out how to get people actually to believe that you can stop a bullet with a job.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask, you can see now that I'm now being edged out. This is like the hook on the Oscars. The music is rising, and pretty soon you won't be able to hear us. So, Condra, JJ, any quick comments, and then we'll let you finish up and explain why it's the way it is.
So just definitely, people with mental health in jails has risen 20% since January. We should all be calling Mayor Adams and saying, hey, why are there not more mental health problem-solving courts? Why are people not being diverted to alternatives who have mental health? You can also call all the DA's offices and actually advocate to get people into alternatives to incarceration. And then we have a ton of different hearings and bills and legislative bills that are coming up. Even this week, for example, Fair Chance for Housing on the 8th, Thursday, we have a rally at 9 a.m. on the steps of City Hall. And then at 10 o'clock, we're going into our hearing. We're trying to get housing for everyone, right? This is part of the problem. So I have my cards in the other room, and I'm happy to give things out, but there's definitely a lot of ways that you all can support by calling your local council people, DAs, and Mayor Adams specifically.
Thank you. JJ?
So my experience is deeply rooted in this, right? Because when I came up in the 90s, through my incarceration, the level of mental health wasn't as high as it is today. But what I realized that a lot of people from the outside will never know is that inside, anytime a problem arose, you were either sent to the box or you were sent to mental health. And if you went to mental health, they gave you drugs that turned people into zombies.
Yes.
And so now over time, the same people that I used to associate with and have conversations with would walk right by me as if I didn't exist because they were not in their right frame of minds. And so that was done to them. And I'm sorry to say that, but that was done to them. And a big part of it happened on Rikers Island. By the time people came upstate, they didn't even know what was happening around them. And that's a sad story because when I first came up, you might see 10 people on a med line. When I left, and I've only been home 15 months, right? When I left, majority of the facility was going to the med runs. They had 75 people get escorted at a time at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, right? They had 2 runs before anything else can go out. And programming got cut because people needed to go get their meds. And all those meds were doing were putting people to sleep.
Yeah.
There was no treatment.
Yeah.
You have a problem? I got something for you, take this. And that's it. So when we talk about behavioral modifications and change, what steps are we actually taking to ensure that a person's behavior can even have an opportunity to change? That's what you need to know.
Thank you. Zachary?
I'll just highlight one other thing that would be wonderful we could use help with, and that you can make a difference about, just around the mental health issue, for instance, is supportive housing. Supportive housing, for those who don't know, is affordable housing with wraparound services for people with serious mental illness and often with drug addiction issues as well. The city promised in 2019, as part of the plan to close Rikers, to add 380 more units of this housing dedicated to people who are in the criminal system. Not one of those units has come online, not a single one. Now, there's an estimate that about 2,600 people cycle in and out of Rikers every single year who need supportive housing. This is just one small piece of progress, 380 beds for 2,600 people, but it's not nothing at all. And it would make a huge difference to them and to all of us, frankly. Right? These are, honestly, they're the people that are in the subways, that are on the streets, that folks are most worried about, right? They could be given housing and care, but we need to actually provide it. And so a call to the council member, a call to the mayor, a call to your elected officials to say, listen, we need this and we need this now. The money was made available, the promise was made, it's time to actually deliver and start to bring these beds online. Please do it now. And so any help you can give would be fantastic.
Thank you very much. And we're going to do a little experiment to combine things together. We have amazing musicians from MOTI, which is an organization that everybody should know. And we hope a lot of people from different congregations join. MOTI takes in music programs, not only programs, but mentorship into prison, jails, and in reentry programs to work one-on-one with individuals, because we know how a connection, belief in oneself could do a lot for, we talked about mental health. It's unbelievable. So Jonathan was a mentee of MOTI, and he's now a mentor, now that he's out. And we have a lot of people, but we need more. This is something that you can do. And together with Jessica, also, we're going to start volunteering programs to go to Rikers to do drama therapy, art therapy. At the moment, they have no programs whatsoever. Guys, maybe you could play as I'm saying this. We're going to do a combination of, because we want you to understand how beautiful, how humane, the human connections that we create when we go and we meet people one-on-one. You know, we realize that we're all the same. Nobody's different. And it's a matter of circumstances that may have made us behave differently. And so we have MOTI. If there's anybody here who's a musician and can give from their time, next week they also have a big benefit. Please look them online. We have Jessica, who's going to do art therapy together with on Rikers Taking People. We also have Exodus that are doing a beautiful program. As you heard, as part of the ATI, they're looking for volunteers that teach yoga, teach meditation, do healing. And I said to Kendra, I think you're in the right place. So please volunteer with us. And please, you know, I don't want to go into, there's a lot of campaigns, you've received them on the page. There's a lot of policies that can change to incorporate tshuva, to incorporate forgiveness into the system, to make us all safer and save us a lot of money on the way. So please read those, and please read our email when we send it to you and respond, because I think, judging by the show up today, there's a lot of people that do want to do something about it. We're also going to do with the Jewish Coalition for Criminal Justice Reform, which Bob and Rachel are here, the directors of the coalition. We're 24 members, shul members that are part of the coalition. And you know the saying, Jews have clout. So when we go advocating, we can do a lot of good. So if you join us, we'll send you all the emails. Just read them. Okay? Thank you so much, Jonathan Finkelstein. Judy, you want to say a last word?
I'm going to, this is Jonathan Finkelman, and he's a MOTI mentor now that after he was a MOTI mentee, and he's working with people after they come out of prison. But we were in prison before COVID, and I'm going to read to you some of the things and show you some of the things that we've received from the prisoners. Yes? Music on the inside.
So just before you,
And
I'll just
it comes from Louis Armstrong, who was incarcerated as a young man, as a child, really, and that's where he learned how to play the horn. And so we use music, and I've been to Rikers and Queensboro, and it's fascinating to see what the people look like when they walk into the room and how they walk out of the room after they've done some music. It's amazing. So I'm going to start the blues and how I introduced it, and then I'll read 3 poems that we received from the guys. My name is Judy. Judy is my name. I said my name is Judy. Judy is my name. I teach for Moti in the prisons. That's my game. This was written at Rikers, summer of 2016. I go to sleep lonely every night. I go to sleep lonely every night. All I want to do is hug my son goodnight. The blues they wrote in response to a short prompt were amazing. It was amazing how immediate and beautiful their original songs were as they were waiting for their court dates. At Queensborough Correctional Institution, which is an exit prison, in the spring of 2019, the prompt here was to write how they might use music when they got home. Roberto R. wrote, "To bring joy to people that's going through hard times, don't have no one to depend on or think that life have no meaning. Maybe just by listening to the rhythm, they can feel better." And this next poem is self-evident. Soon I will be free. This place is history. So much misery, nothing but an old memory. We'll be letting go willingly. Feel the light be within me. I know the light's within me. Thank you.
Still here. Ruth, thank you so much for doing such an amazing job. And John, thank you so much. There's a documentary online about John and his story. Please watch it. It's, what is it called?
Done by embassy. The
YouTube.
man who's responsible for it is right there.
You can look it up at
Everybody wants to know where they
YouTube.
can see conviction.
Where can you stream? I'll send a link to somebody right now.
They want the whole room.
So thank you, everybody. We also want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, CBE, who helped a lot in making this night possible, and the Jewish Coalition, and especially my team of criminal justice reformers for the food, for getting everybody in the room. CBE, thank you. Let's get them a shout out for Brooklyn. They came all the way out from Brooklyn. Thank you very much. Good night.
Let me take a picture of us together.
Okay, please.